Let's see now how to simulate sunlight and then how to adjust exposure. So first of all, if you want to use sunlight, we need to go to the menu that is Lights. We need to open a tool that is called the Sun Positioner, and the first thing that we have to do is we have to place somewhere, and it doesn't matter where, a compass. So we will left click and drag, and when we release the mouse we have to select north direction. When I make another click, I have to simply set the height of this sun, that again it doesn't really matter at all, it's just a symbol. And finally we have our sunlight simulation. What happens here is that when we go to the Modify tab, we will see that this is a light source that has completely different parameters than other lights that we have seen before. And we have just dimensions of the compass, north direction that can be adjusted again. We have the distance, and these are just, as the name says, for display purpose only. Then we have how the sun is managed by default, and the way that is more interesting is by using date, time and location. So instead of changing the angle or the intensity of the sun, what we can do is we can change the hour of the day, and we will see that by doing this our light will change its direction, but at the same time it will change intensity and color. And we are not limited in changing the time or just hours, because we can have a fine tuning by changing minutes, but technically we can also change the day of the year just to simulate a different season, and why not, we can even change the location on Earth to have a more realistic, physically correct simulation of daylight in certain conditions. What happens now is instead something a little bit more tricky, because first of all, when we create our sun positioner, as we can see here, something called sun and sky environment is installed as well. So if I make a rendering and I will zoom out for a second and I press render, I will discover that first of all my background is not more black, but right now it is completely white. And what I have to understand is that when I change light source, I need to change also something called exposure control. And this is something that can be done by going into rendering, exposure control, and here I can see this little button called render preview that I will click immediately, and as I can see my rendering is looking white. The exposure control is managed quickly and easily by this number called exposure value. This number works in this way: the higher it is, the darker the exposure becomes. The smaller it is, the brighter the exposure becomes. In my case, it's obvious. I have to increase this value, and I will set it to something close to 14. And I can see now that in my render preview the rendering will look more correct, and I can now click render just to see if I can trust the render preview, and it is true. I can see now that my environment is not more black, but I have this dome that is the sky. Underneath I have this infinite gray plane. And now we can see also that When we change the hour of the day in our time setting, for example, if I go like early in the morning at 7 a.m., if I press render, I will discover that not only the intensity of the light is changing and the direction, of course, is changing, but even the sky that is related to the sun positioner is changing its color. If I go even earlier, like at 6 a.m., and I render, I will see that the sky turns to yellow. If I go to 5 or 5:25, for example, should be more orange, like a sunrise in a very early morning. And this is how to quickly, easily, but correctly simulate sunlight simulation and adjusting the exposure. The exposure is something that must be adjusted according to which effect we want, which kind of light we are using, and there is not just a fixed value to be correctly used. For example, if I want to make a nice looking render at sunset or sunrise, like in this example, maybe I need to go again to rendering, exposure control, and if I click render preview, I will see that my rendering will be pretty dark, so maybe I need to decrease exposure value, and maybe I will type something like 12. And I can see now that with this number I will balance the dark environment and the lower intensity of light. So if I render, I will have a more visible final result. This is even different when, and I will go back to my original view, when I want to make interior renderings illuminated by exterior sunlight. So if I am inside my house with my point of view and I click render preview, I will see that inside this structure maybe the result will be a little bit too dark, and if I render just to see it bigger, I can see that this is exactly what is going on right now. So I have both maybe to adjust a little bit the hour of the day so that the light will come through the window. So I will maybe adjust like at 7. Why not? Then I go to a rendering, exposure control, render preview, and I will be pretty happy with the result. Maybe I can do something like 12.5 render. I can work with these. It is quite correct. Don't mind about the noise into the picture, because this is something that we will manage later on into render settings. But this is how to balance light sources and exposure. Last interesting thing about sun positioner is that when you create sun positioner, you automatically add, and you can find it in the same menu that you open when you set the exposure. You find this information called the environment map, that is called sun and sky environment. So what you need to know is simply that when you delete your sun positioner, because maybe you want to have a completely different lighting setup, you manually have to delete sun positioner from your project, and you have also to manually delete the sky from your environment, and to do this by opening exposure control menu or environment menu, that's the same, you have to right click on this button and choose clear. And if I click render preview now, I will see that my entire scene will be black or very dark, simply because there are no light sources. And I can add now photometric lights or add the sun with other parameters, but this is how to work with sunlight and exposure control. So, if you find this video interesting or useful, leave a like and let me know with a comment, and why not make me questions for other videos or suggestions, and why not subscribe for more videos like this. And as usual, have fun, bye!